Everyone tells you the loudest person wins the room, but reality tends to disagree. The ones who explain themselves lose leverage the moment they start talking. The ones who beg for respect rarely receive it, and the ones who threaten only reveal how little real power they actually hold. So who wins instead? Not the man shouting and not the man negotiating, but the man who says almost nothing and still walks away with exactly what he came for. Think about the last time you watched someone lose an argument by winning it. They had the better facts, even the moral high ground, and the room still didn't move with them, because the other person never argued at all. They simply waited, calm and unreadable, and let the room arrive at its own conclusion. There is one character in modern cinema who represents this idea more purely than almost anyone else. He barely speaks, he rarely explains, and he never begs, yet an entire criminal underworld reorganizes itself around his presence before he even opens his mouth. His name is John Wick. But this is not really a story about John Wick. It is a story about the hidden laws of power. The same laws Robert Greene spent a lifetime documenting after studying centuries of courts, generals, and con artists, the same laws Machiavelli warned rulers to master or be destroyed by, and the same laws ancient kings and philosophers understood long before Hollywood existed. John Wick is simply the mirror. Every scene in this world is a costume, and underneath the costume is a rule about how power actually moves between human beings. Rules that apply just as much in a boardroom, a family, or a friendship as they do in a fictional underworld of assassins. That is exactly why a fictional assassin, dressed for a stylish action franchise, has become an unlikely teacher of some of the oldest ideas in human strategy. Not because the movie set out to be a philosophy lecture, but because good storytelling, almost by accident, tends to dramatize the same patterns that governed real courts, real empires, and real rivalries for thousands of years before any of this was ever put on film. 18 chapters are waiting ahead, each one taking a single moment from this world and stripping away the choreography to show you the raw, psychological, and historical machinery running quietly underneath it. Machinery that is running in your own life right now, whether you've ever noticed it or not. Let's step through the mirror, one law at a time. Chapter 1. The coin that speaks before the man does a man walks into a hotel late at night, calm and unhurried, saying almost nothing at the front desk. He places a single gold coin on the counter, and without negotiation, without a raised voice, without any explanation of who he is, the staff straightens instantly. Doors that were closed a moment ago now open, and respect appears before a single sentence of justification has been spoken. Most viewers see luxury, a nice hotel, a mysterious currency, some stylish world building. What they miss is that the coin never explains itself because it doesn't need to. Its meaning was built long before this exact moment, through years of discipline and a reputation earned somewhere entirely outside of this scene. The coin isn't paying for the room. It is a signal, and signals only work when they have already been earned elsewhere. Human beings are constantly, unconsciously scanning for status signals, a process psychologists call thin slicing. The brain's ability to form snap judgments from very small amounts of information within seconds of meeting someone. This is the psychological law of preloaded credibility. If you have to explain your value in the moment, you have already lost most of its power, because explanation itself signals uncertainty. Robert Greene calls this Law 4, always say less than necessary, since every unnecessary word gives other people more material to question or unravel. Silence isn't emptiness, it is unclaimed territory, and whoever fills it last controls it. Ancient rulers understood this instinctively. Roman emperors rarely explained their decrees to the public, they simply issued them, and the explanation was that they were the emperor. Medieval kings didn't argue with peasants about the legitimacy of their crown. The crown itself did the arguing, embedded in ceremony and inherited symbol. In modern negotiation, the same pattern holds. The side that over-explains its position is often read by the other side as unsure of it, while the deal-maker who states one clear position and lets it sit in silence frequently secures better terms than any amount of persuasive follow-up ever could. In high-level business negotiation, some of the most effective deal-makers are trained specifically to say less, not more, once an opening offer is on the table, because every additional sentence gives the other side more surface area to probe or exploit. Your own reputation works the same way. Built quietly, long before anyone thinks to ask about it. But if silence is this powerful, what happens when it is finally broken and the man who never explains himself is forced to speak? Chapter 2. The rules that are more feared than the man inside the hotel, a strange, almost sacred rule governs everyone who enters. No business, no violence is permitted on these grounds, and even the most dangerous killers in the world obey it without hesitation. Nobody enforces this with visible guns at the door. It is enforced with something stronger, the certainty of consequence. Viewers often assume the hotel stays peaceful out of shared politeness among criminals, but it isn't politeness at all. The hotel remains neutral because breaking its one rule guarantees a cost so severe and so inevitable that no one is willing to test it. And that is architecture, not civility. This is the psychology of invisible enforcement. Behavioral research consistently shows that humans don't primarily change their actions because of visible supervision, but because of the perceived certainty of consequence. The belief that if a rule is broken, something reliable will happen, whether or not anyone is watching in that exact moment. This is far cheaper and more powerful to maintain than fear of a single enforcer. It is fear of an entire system that never sleeps. This echoes Law 3. Conceal your intentions, layered with a subtler idea. Power that hides its enforcement mechanism looks larger than power that constantly displays it. A ruler who threatens punishment daily looks anxious, while a ruler whose punishment is simply understood commands a deeper, quieter obedience.
Ancient trade routes and merchant guilds maintained order across vast distances the same way. A merchant's reputation for dishonesty traveled faster than any messenger, and cheating one partner could mean being blacklisted in cities never even visited, purely on the strength of certain consequence. Online marketplaces today rely on an almost identical mechanism. A single confirmed violation can permanently damage a seller's ability to do business anywhere on the platform. And that certainty, not constant active policing, is what keeps most sellers honest. In your own life, boundaries work exactly the same way. People respect them not because you announce them loudly, but because you follow through quietly every single time, without exception, regardless of how tired or inconvenienced you are in that particular moment. Consistency is the real enforcer. But rules only hold as long as no one dares break them. So what happens the moment someone finally does? Chapter 3. The marca, how a promise becomes a weapon. A debt is called in, not money, but a spoken promise made years earlier, sealed in tradition, now demanding repayment, whether the man who owes it still wants to honor it or not. He has no legal escape, because the obligation isn't written into any contract a lawyer could dispute. It is written into his word, and in this world, a word is treated as more binding than any signature. We tend to assume power comes from money or weapons, but here the deepest form of control comes from something quieter: commitment. Once you give your word inside a system built on honor, you no longer fully control your own future. The promise now owns a piece. This reflects one of the most extensively documented forces in behavioral psychology: commitment and consistency. Once a person commits to something, even something small, they feel intense internal pressure to follow through, because breaking that commitment damages their self-image, not merely their reputation. This aligns with Law 13, when asking for help appeal to people's self-interest rather than their mercy or gratitude, because gratitude fades while a binding obligation does not. Feudal systems across medieval Europe and Japan ran almost entirely on this principle. A lord didn't need to threaten a vassal daily because the vassal's original oath did that work permanently. This dynamic shows up constantly in ordinary professional life too. Someone agrees early in their career to help out during a difficult stretch, framed as a temporary favor, and years later that favor is quietly invoked to justify unequal treatment long after the circumstances that justified it have changed. The debt was never written down, yet it functions exactly like a binding contract in the mind of the person who extended it, precisely because a promise, once spoken aloud, tends to outlive the willingness of either party to keep enforcing it consciously. Be careful what you promise, because promises outlive the mood you made them in. And instead of chasing gratitude, build situations where people genuinely owe you something real. But what happens to a person bound by too many promises, who finally, desperately, wants out? Chapter 4. Why everyone fears him before he arrives. Before this man ever appears fully in a given scene, other characters are already terrified of him. They whisper his name, cancel plans they had already committed to, and change strategy the moment they hear he might be involved. His reputation walks into the room before he physically does. This isn't just clever screenwriting. It is a demonstration of one of the rarest forms of power that exists. Power that operates entirely without physical presence. This is the psychology of reputation as a force multiplier. Human brains react powerfully to anticipated threats based on stored information, and a strong reputation is essentially a pre-installed psychological trigger sitting inside someone else's mind, activating fear or respect before any interaction has begun. If your reputation is strong enough, you can win conflicts you were never even present for, because the other side has already run the simulation and concluded they will lose. This is Law 5. So much depends on reputation. Guard it with your life, because reputation continues doing work while you sleep or are absent, requiring no ongoing physical effort to maintain its effect. Generals throughout military history understood this deeply. Some of the most successful campaigns were won not through battle, but through terrifying reputation alone. Cities surrendering before a single soldier crossed the border, simply because the known cost of resistance was already understood by the people inside the walls. The same effect shows up in business and sport today, where certain competitors are described as having an aura that defeats rivals before the contest even starts. A measurable effect of reputation-altering behavior before a single point is scored. Your own reputation is doing work for you right now in rooms you are not currently in, compounding quietly from every promise kept and every boundary held, whether or not you're consciously tracking any of it. But reputation only protects you as long as it stays intact. So what happens when it is finally tested directly? Chapter 5. The High Table. Power that never shows its face. Above the world of assassins and hidden currencies sits a shadowy governing council, the High Table, rarely seen and rarely heard directly, yet nearly every major decision eventually bends to its will. Viewers often picture it simply as the bosses, the way any organization has an executive layer, but its real power comes from something subtler: distance. The less visible an authority is, the more mythical and inescapable it becomes inside people's imagination. This demonstrates the psychology of abstraction and authority. The less concrete a figure is, the more people's own imagination fills the gaps, and imagination almost always makes that authority seem larger and stricter than any single visible person realistically could be. A faceless power is structurally harder to challenge because you cannot negotiate with something you can't clearly see. This aligns with Law 17, keep others in suspended terror through unpredictability, because when authority stays distant and mysterious, obedience becomes nearly automatic, since no one can calculate exactly where the line is. Ancient religious and political hierarchies functioned this way for centuries. A distant, unseen ruler, glimpsed only through statues and ceremony, often held more unquestioned authority than a visible, approachable one, because mystery reliably bred deeper obedience than presence. Large modern organizations show the same pattern, with employees speaking of corporate as an abstract force shaping their working lives, despite rarely interacting with the people who make those decisions. And that distance often produces more anxious compliance than a visible manager ever would. Distance can be real power, but it comes at a cost, since people fear what they don't understand far more than they respect it. And fear alone rarely produces the kind of lasting loyalty that survives real adversity. But what happens when someone finally stops fearing the unseen and decides to challenge it directly? Chapter 6, Winston, the most dangerous man who never fights. Winston never draws a weapon the way the assassins around him constantly do, yet scene after scene he outmaneuvers people far more violent than himself, simply through timing, precisely chosen words, and careful positioning within the rules of the world he manages. Audiences often see him as a supporting character, a host or peacekeeper, but he is arguably one of the most strategically dangerous figures in the entire story, because he consistently wins without ever needing to escalate. This is the psychology of strategic restraint. The person who reacts with the least visible emotion in a high-stakes moment usually retains the most control over the outcome, because escalation gives away information and burns through options quickly, while restraint preserves both. Winston isn't passive, he's patient, and patience is a far more dangerous trait than aggression. This reflects Law 9. Win through your actions, never through argument. Winston rarely argues his position directly. He simply arranges circumstances so that the outcome he wants becomes the only remaining logical option. Diplomats throughout history who avoided direct confrontation often outlasted the generals working alongside them, because wars end while quiet diplomacy continues working for decades. Skilled mediators in high conflict disputes rely on this same restraint today, quietly arranging timing and information flow so that both parties arrive independently at the resolution the mediator wanted from the start, without ever feeling argued into it. Before reacting emotionally in your own tense situations, it helps to ask whether you're responding right now or positioning yourself for later, since the two often look identical in the moment but lead to very different outcomes. But strategic patience has a limit. What happens when even the most careful diplomat is finally forced to choose a side? Chapter 7. Why violence is never the real weapon. Despite the intense, highly choreographed combat running through this world, the actual turning points of the larger story rarely happen through fighting alone. They happen through information, timing, shifting alliances, and broken or honored agreements, with the fighting simply the visible surface, sitting on top of a quieter game. The real battles are fought in negotiations and whispered alliances, made and unmade, long before or entirely separate from any physical confrontation the audience actually sees. Corporate rivalries mirror this constantly. Two companies may appear locked in aggressive public conflict, dueling ad campaigns and public statements, while the actual outcome is decided elsewhere entirely, in quiet talent acquisition, patents, and supplier agreements the public never sees, and by the time the public battle becomes visible, the underlying strategic contest has frequently already been resolved. In your own conflicts, professional or personal, it's worth asking honestly whether direct confrontation is truly necessary, or whether patience and better positioning could achieve the same outcome at a fraction of the cost. But even the most patient strategist eventually runs out of quiet options. What happens when the only path left is direct confrontation? Chapter 8. The price of being underestimated. Throughout the story, enemy after enemy makes the same fatal mistake, assuming this quiet, restrained man is finished, weakened, or easily manageable. And every single time that assumption costs them everything. This repeated pattern isn't a coincidence, a plot. It demonstrates one of the oldest and most costly strategic errors in human history, mistaking outward calm for actual weakness. This is the psychology of threat miscalibration. Humans instinctively judge danger largely based on visible aggression and volume, so someone quiet and non-reactive tends to be unconsciously coded as safe, even when their actual capability is far greater than someone loud and openly aggressive. This bias gets people killed in fiction and gets people fired or blindsided in real life, not because the quiet person was weak, but because the observer's threat detection was miscalibrated from the start. This connects to Law 15, crush your enemy totally, since those who underestimate a threat rarely prepare adequately for it, and by the time they realize their mistake, the advantage has already shifted. Investors frequently make this exact mistake with companies that appear quiet on the surface, no flashy announcements or aggressive marketing, only to discover too late that the company had spent years quietly building capability a louder competitor never took seriously until it was too far ahead to catch, never confused someone's silence for the outer limit of their capability. The quiet co-worker or unassuming rival often holds far more than their volume suggests. But if everyone keeps repeating this mistake, what is the ongoing cost to him of constantly having to prove them wrong? Chapter 9. Why every alliance in this world is temporary. Alliances shift constantly throughout the story. A trusted friend becomes a paid enemy. A rival becomes a temporary ally out of necessity. And no relationship is treated as permanently fixed, since everyone is simply calculating, moment to moment, where their own interest currently lies. Casual viewers read this as betrayal, as though the story is simply cynical about friendship. But what's actually being shown is closer to pure game theory, a world where loyalty is treated as a variable rather than a constant. This reflects the psychology of incentive-driven behavior. Decades of research show that people's stated values and their actual choices diverge sharply once the cost of holding to those values rises high enough, and loyalty that only survives when convenient was never really loyalty at all. It was simply alignment of incentives that happened to look like loyalty from the outside. This echoes Law 2, never put too much trust in friends and learn how to use enemies, not as a call to cynicism, but as a warning that unconditional trust offered without understanding true incentives is one of the most common ways power is lost. Business partnerships often follow this same arc. Two founders launch a company as close friends, genuinely aligned, and years later, as equity and stakes grow, that same friendship is tested by incentives that didn't exist at the founding. Partnerships that survive long-term are rarely the ones that assumed friendship would hold automatically. They're the ones that consciously built structures to keep incentives aligned as circumstances changed, revisiting the arrangement openly rather than relying on old goodwill to carry it forward indefinitely. This doesn't mean treating every relationship as disposable. It means understanding clearly what actually motivates the people around you. But if every alliance is temporary, how does anyone in this world ever build something that actually lasts? Chapter 10. Discipline, the invisible training behind every legend. The film never lingers on training montages, yet every movement this man makes on screen carries the unmistakable weight of thousands of hours of repetition the audience never sees. Audiences experience only the finished result, effortless and graceful, without realizing that effortlessness of this kind is never actually effortless to build. It is the visible tip of an enormous, invisible base of repetition. This reflects what psychologists studying expertise call automaticity, the point at which a skill has been repeated so many times it no longer requires conscious thought to execute, typically requiring years of deliberate, unglamorous repetition, long before any observer ever sees the result. The danger of only seeing the finished version of anyone's skill is that it makes mastery look like natural talent rather than accumulated, unseen discipline. This connects to a principle found across Stoicism and Bushido alike. The visible calm of a master is not the absence of effort, but effort so thoroughly absorbed it no longer looks like effort at all. Elite musicians describe an almost identical arc. Audiences hear a flawless performance lasting minutes with no visible sign of the tens of thousands of hours of often frustrating practice required to reach that level, and the gap between what an audience witnesses and what actually produced it is, in every field of true mastery, enormous and invisible by design. The same holds for surgeons, pilots, and craftsmen of every kind. The calm, unremarkable competence on display in the moment that matters is never actually built in that moment. Whatever mastery you're chasing, the invisible repetition is the actual work, and the effortless-looking result is simply the bill finally coming due on discipline. No one watched you practice. But what happens when discipline this deep is tested against an opponent who never had to build any of it? Chapter 11. Assume formlessness. Why the most powerful people are impossible to predict. Across the story, this man adapts constantly, changing tactics, locations, and allies depending entirely on the situation in front of him, never rigidly attached to one single method of operating. Casual viewers see this simply as resourcefulness useful for keeping an action story moving, but it actually represents one of the rarest strategic traits available to anyone: the refusal to become predictable, even to people who have studied you closely. This reflects the psychology of predictability as vulnerability. The more consistently predictable a person's responses become, the easier they are for an opponent to manipulate or outmaneuver, since unmanaged predictability under conflict becomes a liability others can plan around. This is Law 48. Assume formlessness, since any fixed form eventually becomes a target that others learn to attack, while water has no fixed shape and cannot be cut or cornered the way a rigid solid can. Guerrilla campaigns throughout military history relied heavily on this exact principle, refusing to fight predictably on the enemy's preferred terms and denying larger, more rigid forces the fixed target they were prepared for. Athletes at the highest competitive levels describe the same idea, since opponents who study game film extensively can prepare for a predictable pattern but struggle far more against a competitor willing to genuinely vary their approach mid-contest, forcing them to spend mental energy adapting in real time rather than executing a plan already rehearsed. Becoming too rigidly identified with one fixed way of operating makes you easier to predict and eventually outmaneuver in a career, a personality, or a set of tactics alike. But formlessness alone isn't the final answer, because eventually every person has to decide what they're actually fighting for underneath the shifting tactics. Chapter 12. The Psychology of Fear. Without a single word spoken, in one recurring pattern, this man enters rooms full of armed men and, instead of shouting or negotiating, simply moves. No monologue, no warning, with the fear in the room generated entirely by presence, timing, and known history, rather than anything said out loud. It's tempting to read this as simple action movie style, but underneath is a genuinely accurate observation about how fear actually spreads between human beings, rarely through words and almost always through anticipated action. This connects to research on nonverbal threat assessment. Long before language evolved, human ancestors survived by reading posture and movement for signs of danger far faster than any verbal warning could travel, and that ancient system still runs beneath our conscious thinking today, which is why a calm, purposeful presence can generate more fear than an explicit verbal threat. Words can be argued with, but a committed physical presence cannot. This connects back to Law 17 from a different angle. Unpredictability paired with silence removes the other party's ability to plan a verbal counter-argument, because there is no argument being made, only action already in motion. Special Forces training has long emphasized this same principle, since controlled, silent, purposeful movement is often more psychologically destabilizing than loud aggression, denying the opponent any emotional foothold to react against. Experienced hostage negotiators are trained to recognize this in reverse. A truly dangerous person in a volatile situation is often the quietest one in the room, since loud, agitated behavior frequently signals lower actual risk. In tense situations in ordinary life, staying calm and reducing unnecessary talk often unsettles the other party more than raising your voice ever would. But if fear this deep can be created without a word, what happens when words are finally, deliberately used? Chapter 13. The Continental as a Masterclass in Incentive Design. The hotel doesn't simply forbid violence through a spoken rule. It is built, physically and structurally, around incentives, with services and privileges available only to those who follow its code and permanently revoked from anyone who doesn't. Viewers tend to focus on the rule itself without noticing that it is reinforced by an entire structure of rewards layered on top of it, not just the threat of punishment underneath. This reflects incentive design, a principle studied extensively in behavioral economics. Systems relying purely on punishment tend to produce resentment and rule-breaking the moment enforcement weakens, while systems that pair consequence with genuine valuable reward for compliance produce far more durable voluntary cooperation. Because people aren't just avoiding a penalty, they're protecting something they value. Successful legal and trade systems throughout history worked the same way, where participation brought real benefit and violation meant permanent exclusion. So the system policed itself. Loyalty programs run by modern airlines and financial institutions operate on an almost identical structure. Status tiers and exclusive benefits that quietly disappear the moment the underlying agreement is violated, with customers rarely thinking of themselves as being controlled precisely because the reward side stays visible while the enforcement side operates quietly in the background, exactly the way the Continental's code was designed to function without ever needing to be spelled out. Whether managing a team, a family, or your own habits, systems built only on punishment tend to erode over time, while systems that also offer genuine reward tend to sustain themselves with far less ongoing enforcement. But what happens when someone decides the reward is no longer worth the cost of following the rule at all? Carl Jung described this suppressed part of the self as the shadow, the aspects of our own personality we learned early to hide because they conflict with social expectations of politeness or restraint. Characters who act out the shadow without apology become deeply compelling precisely because they are living out an impulse the audience has spent a lifetime suppressing. Jung argued that psychological wholeness requires acknowledging the shadow, not eliminating it, integrating disciplined assertiveness into a balanced life, rather than suppressing it entirely or letting it run unchecked. Therapists working with clients on assertiveness observe the same pattern outside any mythological framing at all. Clients who suppressed reasonable boundaries out of fear of conflict often describe a strange, almost guilty relief the first time they finally enforce one, reclaiming a part of themselves that had simply been switched off, not because it didn't exist, but because it had never been permitted to act. Mythology across nearly every culture contains a similar figure, the quiet outsider who finally acts without restraint after enormous provocation, satisfying something ancient that ordinary social life rarely permits. Where in your own life have you suppressed a boundary out of politeness that genuinely needed enforcing? But total suppression and total release are both extremes. What does it actually look like to integrate this, holding power without being consumed by it? Chapter 15. Why one proof is never enough to build real authority. The world of this story constantly layers proof on top of proof. A reputation isn't built from a single event, but from years of consistent stories repeated across different people in different cities, told by witnesses who never spoke to each other, yet arrive at the same conclusion. A single dramatic act rarely creates lasting authority on its own, and the myth surrounding this character is durable precisely because it is corroborated from multiple independent sources rather than resting on one story alone. This reflects the psychology of social proof stacking. A single testimonial is easy to dismiss as exaggeration, But multiple independent confirmations of the same underlying pattern are far harder for the human mind to explain away, producing much stronger belief than any single account, however dramatic, ever could alone. This connects to a principle threaded through Greene, Machiavelli, and the Stoic writings of Marcus Aurelius alike. Authority resting on a single dramatic gesture is fragile because it can be dismissed as luck, while authority built from a consistent pattern, confirmed repeatedly across witnesses, becomes something closer to accepted fact. Scientific credibility works on the same principle. A single study, however well designed, is rarely treated as settled fact because it could be an anomaly, and it's only once independent researchers reproduce the same finding that it becomes accepted knowledge. Historical figures whose reputations outlasted their own lifetimes were rarely remembered because of one isolated act, but because independent accounts, written by people who often disagreed about everything else, kept confirming the same core pattern. If you want your own reputation to be durable, look for consistency across many small moments rather than manufacturing one impressive gesture, since multiple small proofs repeated reliably build something no single grand moment ever fully can. But even the strongest reputation eventually faces an ending. What happens to a legend once the story it was built on starts to close? Chapter 16. Why the ending never feels like a celebration. By the final stretch of this story, there is no triumphant celebration waiting. There is exhaustion, loss, a man who has won every tactical battle and still seems to be searching for something the fighting itself was never going to give him. Action-oriented viewers sometimes expect a purely triumphant conclusion, but what's actually being shown is more philosophically honest. Victory within a system built entirely on power rarely delivers the peace people assume it will. This reflects research on hedonic adaptation, the well-documented tendency for the emotional payoff of any achievement to fade far faster than expected once it's actually obtained. Winning the fight or defeating the rival doesn't produce the lasting resolution the character or the audience unconsciously expects. This is where Stoic philosophy quietly reasserts itself underneath the action. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the emptiness of external victory when it isn't paired with internal peace, since a person can win every external contest and remain deeply unsettled if the deeper internal contest was never addressed. Studies tracking lottery winners over multiple years found a strikingly similar pattern to what many high achievers report after reaching a long-sought goal, an initial spike in happiness that fades back toward each person's prior baseline far faster than expected, with the external circumstance changing dramatically, while the underlying internal experience largely did not. Many of history's most externally successful conquerors left behind writings late in life expressing similar disillusionment despite vast territory and power accumulated, a persistent sense that none of it had delivered the internal resolution they had originally been chasing. It's worth asking honestly before chasing the next external win, what you actually expect it to give you internally, and whether that expectation is realistic based on what previous wins have actually delivered. So if external victory alone was never going to be enough, what was the fight actually for, underneath everything else? Chapter 17. Every battle was won before it started. By the time any major confrontation actually begins on screen, this man has usually already secured the resources, allies, and information he needs, and the visible fight is almost a formality. The real contest was decided earlier, in preparation no one saw. Audiences experienced the fight as the climax, but the outcome was rarely determined there. It was determined quietly, well before the visible confrontation ever started. This reflects what performance psychologists call preparation as confidence transfer. Extensive preparation doesn't just improve raw skill, it reduces uncertainty going into a high-stakes moment, lowering stress response and improving decision-making exactly when it matters. Sun Tzu wrote that victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win, an idea underlying nearly every strategic tradition Greene studied. The visible contest is the least important part of any real victory. Napoleon Bonaparte was famous among contemporaries for the extraordinary detail of his logistical preparation, long before a single shot was fired in many of his most celebrated victories. The coin, the marker, the hotel, the high table, the silence, the reputation, the underestimation, the alliances, the discipline, the formlessness, the incentive design, the shadow, the layered proof, the hollow ending, and the freedom were never really about an assassin in a stylish suit moving through a stylized underworld. They were about you, about the promises you make and whether you understand how long they actually last after you've made them, about the reputation you're quietly building right now in rooms you're not even standing in, about whether the alliances in your own life are built on genuine shared values or on incentives that could shift the moment the cost changes, about the invisible repetition behind anything you've ever called a talent, and about whether you're spending your one limited life chasing power over other people or mastery over yourself, which is the only version of power that was ever actually going to be waiting for you at the end. The rules were never actually hidden inside the movie. They were hidden inside the mirror the movie happened to be holding up in front of you the entire time, patiently, chapter after chapter, waiting for you to notice you'd been watching yourself the whole way through. If there is one thread running underneath all 18 chapters, it's this. Nearly every form of power explored here was quiet before it was ever loud. The coin was earned in silence. The reputation was built in rooms no one filmed. The discipline was practiced where no audience was watching. Even the freedom at the very end was won not through a final dramatic act, but through years of smaller, unglamorous choices that never made it onto the screen at all. The version of power worth actually wanting was never the version that needs to announce itself. What law are you already living by without ever realizing it?